Before I begin, I want to say that all the incidents shared here are real and collected from many people. Some events may seem small, some big, and some unusual that is completely natural. I am telling the story exactly as I collected it. I am starting with the first story. In the quiet riverbanks of somewhere in Asia, most boatmen go home to their families at sunset. But there was one man who lived on his boat. He would tie his large wooden vessel to the dock every night and sleep under the bamboo canopy, lulled by the rhythm of the water. One night, long after the other boatmen had left, two young men appeared on the bank. They were carrying an elderly woman who looked deathly ill. "Please, uncle," one of the young men pleaded. "Our mother is very sick. We need to get her across the river to the clinic. We will pay you double." The boatman was hesitant. He was alone. His assistant had already gone home. His lantern was out of oil, and the river was pitch black. "It's too dangerous to cross in the dark," he warned. But the men begged and pleaded, claiming their mother wouldn't survive the night if they waited. Moved by pity, the boatman agreed. The two men carried the old woman into the covered part of the boat and sat beside her. The boatman began to row. When they reached the middle of the river, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and full of agony. "Is she okay?" the boatman shouted, his heart racing. "Is your mother all right?" There was no answer. The boatman wanted to stop and check, but the current was strong. He had to keep rowing with all his strength to keep the boat from capsizing. He called out again, but the silence from the covered area was heavy and suffocating. Finally, the boat touched the opposite bank. The two young men stepped out of the boat. They didn't say a word. They didn't offer the double fare they promised. They simply walked away into the darkness of the trees, their footsteps silent on the mud. The boatman was confused. "Wait, what about your mother? Aren't you taking her with you?" The men didn't look back. They vanished into the woods. Trembling, the boatman reached for a box of matches. He struck a flame and crawled into the covered part of the boat. What he saw shattered his mind. The old woman was gone. Lying on the blood-soaked floor mat was a human skull, stripped of its flesh. Beside it was a pile of broken ribs and bones, still wet and glistening. There was no body, just the leftovers of a horrific feast. The boatman fainted. He was found the next morning by local fishermen, drifting aimlessly in the reeds. He was hospitalized for over a week, unable to speak. When he finally told his story, the villagers rushed to the boat to see the evidence. But there was nothing there. The boat was perfectly clean. There was no blood, no bones, and no skull. The villagers thought the old man had simply had a nightmare. But the boatman knew the truth. He never spent another night on that river. He knew that some passengers don't pay in money, they pay in blood. And sometimes, the sons you help are just monsters bringing a meal to their queen. The year was 1979. I was 25 years old and had been married for only a year. It was the season of the harvest festival, and my wife had already gone to her father's house. I decided to join her later, traveling alone on foot. It was a long journey through muddy village paths. By the time I reached the local market near my father-in-law's village, the sun had set. I stayed for a while to watch a traditional stick-fighting match, losing track of time. When I finally left, it was 11 p.m. I bought 2 kilograms of sweet snacks for my in-laws and started the final 2-mile walk in total darkness. The road ahead was lonely. About 200 yards in front of me stood several massive banyan trees near an old, ruined brick structure. Beyond that was a small river and a thick, dark forest. As I approached the banyan trees, the air suddenly turned heavy. Then, a strange sound began, the roar of a powerful wind howling through the leaves. But when I looked at the trees, not a single leaf was moving. The air around me was perfectly still, yet the sound of the storm was deafening. I felt a prickle of fear. I reached into my pocket for my matches, hoping that fire would keep any spirits away, but I realized I had left them at home to make a good impression on my in-laws. The howling wind grew louder. Remembering that spirits are attracted to sweets, I quickly threw the bag of sweet snacks toward the old ruins and tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, like lead. Suddenly, the wind stopped. Silence fell over the road. I started walking again, but I felt something, or someone, walking right beside me in the bushes. I could hear the branches snapping, but I couldn't see anything. I reached the river. As I crossed a dry patch, I heard a massive splashing sound in the water to my left. It sounded like 5 or 6 men were running through the waist-deep water at high speed. But the river was empty. I scrambled up the bank and reached the edge of the forest. That was when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the road was a figure about 6 feet tall. It was draped in a white cloth from its chest down to its feet. But from the neck up, there was no skin, only a white, polished skull. Its long, bony arms were stretched out wide, blocking the entire path. The skeleton tilted its head and let out a silent, twisted grin. Its face was so deformed and horrific that I felt my heart skip a beat. It took a slow, rattling step toward me. I tried to turn back and run, but when I spun around, the creature was already there, even closer than before. It had teleported behind me. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. The world turned black as I collapsed. I woke up the next morning in my father-in-law's house. My wife was crying by my side. She told me that 3 local fishermen had heard a blood-curdling scream and found me unconscious on the road. It took me 3 years to find the courage to visit that village again. I still don't know what was waiting for me under those banyan trees, but I learned one thing. Some roads are never meant to be walked alone at night. This story took place in 1996 in a quiet rural district of Southeast Asia. He was a master's student at government college and worked as a private tutor to pay for his studies. One Wednesday evening, he received urgent news. His elder sister, who lived in a remote village, was very sick. He finished his lessons on Thursday evening and rushed to catch a bus. By the time he reached the stop near his sister's village, it was nearly midnight. It was the peak of the monsoon season. A light rain was falling, and the dirt roads were thick with mud. To reach his sister's house, he had to cross a small river. Because of the heavy rains, the river was overflowing. He walked quickly through the darkness, using the flashes of lightning to see the path. When he reached the riverbank, he was relieved to see a single small wooden boat waiting at the riverside dock. A lone boatman sat at the back, his head and shoulders covered by a thick shawl to protect him from the rain. He didn't say a word. He just stepped into the boat. Thankful to have found a ride so late at night, the boat began to move immediately. As they crossed the deep, dark water, he noticed something strange. He couldn't hear the sound of the or splashing in the water. There was no rhythmic thud of wood against the boat. He looked back and saw the boatman sitting perfectly still, his hands resting in his lap. Yet, the boat was gliding across the water at a steady speed. Maybe the current is just strong today, he thought, trying to stay calm. When the boat touched the opposite bank, he stepped out onto the mud. He reached into his pocket for some money and asked, "How much do I owe you?" The boatman didn't move. He didn't answer. He asked again, a bit louder this time. Still, there was no response. The man just sat there with the shawl pulled low over his head, like a veil. He grew frustrated. He stepped closer to hand the money over. At that moment, a massive bolt of lightning cracked across the sky, lighting up the entire riverbank. The boatman finally looked up. His heart stopped. The man's head was turned completely backward. His face was where the back of his neck should have been, staring at him with hollow, empty eyes. He let out a scream and collapsed into the mud, losing consciousness. He woke up at dawn to the sound of voices. 2 local fishermen were standing over him. He, still trembling, told them everything: the midnight journey, the silent boat, and the terrifying boatman with the reversed head. The fishermen looked at each other, their faces turning pale. "Son," one of them said, "you must be mistaken. There has never been a boat crossing here. The real riverside dock is miles down the river. No boat has touched this bank in over 50 years. He looked at the river. It was empty. There were no boat tracks in the mud. No oars. Nothing. To this day, he still doesn't know who or what carried him across that deep water, or why it chose to show him its true face." Our family home in Safranbolu, Turkey, is surrounded by history and shadows. To reach it, you have to walk nearly a mile along a narrow gravel road from the old railway station. Right at the entrance of our property stands an ancient, massive plane tree and a long-forgotten cemetery. Our house is full of stories about that tree and the strange presences said to linger within the dense woods behind our land. A few years ago, my eldest uncle, Mubin, was found unconscious near the neighborhood mosque. He had suffered a massive stroke and passed away in the hospital that afternoon. The trouble began 4 days after his funeral. My younger uncle, Munib, was returning home from work late at night. As he walked past the graveyard, he saw a figure standing in the shadows of the tamarind tree. It was Mubin. Munib was a brave man, so he didn't run. The spirit of Mubin looked at him and spoke in a cold, hollow voice. "Munib, you used to invite me to dinner all the time when I was alive. Why have you stopped inviting me now?" Munib, trembling but trying to stay respectful, replied, "I'm sorry, uncle. Please, come home with me tonight." The figure vanished. Munib rushed into the house, soaked in a cold sweat. My grandmother immediately knew something was wrong. She performed a ritual using the heat of a fire to calm his nerves and protect him from the chill of the dead. 2 nights later, around midnight, Munib heard a knock at the door. A voice that sounded exactly like his cousin, Bashar, called out, "Munib, come outside. I need to go to the bathroom at the back of the land, and I'm too scared to go alone." Thinking Bashar was actually there, Munib stepped outside. He followed the figure of Bashar toward the back of the property, near the bamboo groves. Suddenly, the figure ahead of him simply dissolved into the air. Munib froze. He was standing right next to the oldest part of our family cemetery. Suddenly, he felt a heavy, ice-cold hand drop onto his shoulder. He turned around and saw the pale face of the dead Mubin staring back at him. "I couldn't come to dinner the other night because you were sick," the spirit whispered. "But I am here now." Munib's heart gave out from terror, and he collapsed. When he didn't return, the family went searching with flashlights and sticks. They found him in the graveyard, lying in an impossible position. His head was tilted down into a ditch while his legs were propped up high against a grave, as if he had been tossed there like a doll. The next day, we took Munib to a wise old man from the Santal tribe who was known for communicating with spirits. Without being told anything about Mubin's death, the old man spoke. "You ignored the last wish of the dead man," he said. "Mubin wanted to be buried next to his parents in the old part of the graveyard, but you buried him in the new section instead. He lured Munib to that spot because that is where he belongs. If you had reached Munib just a few minutes later, you wouldn't have found a living man, you would have found another corpse." We realized then that some promises must be kept, even after the heart stops beating. Two years ago, a woman moved into the ground floor apartment of our family home. We didn't know much about her at first, but soon, A constant line of people began forming outside her door, like patients waiting for a famous doctor. We eventually learned she was a spiritual medium, a woman who claimed to practice ancient rituals to summon and control dark entities in order to solve people's problems. As children, we were thrilled. We loved the idea that supernatural beings were visiting our house every day. The ancient ritual women even claimed that her entity had specifically told her to rent our house. We were happy tenants, and she always paid her rent on time. However, a problem arose. The ancient ritual women had a massive extended family. Dozens of relatives were constantly staying over, cooking, and bathing. Our water bill skyrocketed. A tank that usually lasted our entire building for a day was empty in just 3 hours. After several warnings, my father had no choice but to give her an eviction notice. The ancient ritual women moved out, and a new family moved in, a young couple with 2 beautiful little girls. We were relieved that the water crisis was over, but the peace didn't last long. One night, the young mother was watching TV with her daughters. Her husband was working late. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock at the door. A voice, identical to her husband's, called out, "Fatima's mother, open the door." Surprised that he was home so early, she ran to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. There was no one there. She stepped outside, looked around the corner, and called his name. But there was only silence. Terrified, she ran back inside and locked the door. Immediately, the knocking started again, not just on the door, but on the windows. Then, a heavy thumping sound erupted from the roof, as if a group of people were jumping and running directly above her head. The same voice began to shout from every side of the room at once, "Open the door! Open the door!" The poor woman sat in the middle of the room, clutching her crying children and reciting every prayer she knew. The banging continued for an hour until, suddenly, everything went silent. A few minutes later, there was a normal, impatient knock. She opened the door to find her real husband, looking frustrated. "Why did it take you so long to open the door?" he asked. The woman collapsed into his arms, sobbing. The next morning, my mother contacted the old ancient ritual women. We learned that this wasn't the first time her guardians had acted out. When she first moved in, a group of local thugs had tried to harass her for money. She didn't argue with them. The next morning, those same men came back, trembling, and fell at her feet begging for forgiveness. They claimed that all night, invisible hands had been smashing their furniture and dragging them out of their beds. The ancient ritual women apologized to us. She explained that her entity was very protective of her and didn't like that she had been forced to leave our house. They were guarding the apartment against anyone new. Turns out, even when a tenant leaves, they sometimes leave their guests behind.